Hi all, I'm Ezrado and you're watching my travel channel where I talk all things Colombia. So as of late, I've been making some videos that are admittedly a little spicy, like ranting about why Cartagena's underrated or recounting my misadventures getting mugged and missing a flight in Colombia, but today I wanted to restore some positivity. With that in mind, I thought why not share some of my favourite things about Colombian people, who were arguably one of the main reasons I decided to live in the country to begin with. Just a disclaimer that everything on this list is sort of a generalisation in that nothing is going to apply to every single person there, but these are just things that stood out to me as being very widely common. So without further ado, here are 5 things I love about Colombians. Alright, first thing, they're passionate. Now this might seem like an obvious cliche, but I am picking my wording very carefully here, as what I'm not saying is that they're super happy people. I mean, they can be, but I don't think just saying that paints the whole picture. I think a better way to look at it is that Colombians often experience higher levels of emotions compared to many other cultures like my own. By that I mean that whatever emotion is driving them, it's driven with great passion. If they're happy, then yes, they can be really happy and fun people to be around, but when they're angry or sad, they can feel these emotions very intensely as well. I don't think I need to explain this much because I know there is a prevailing stereotype about Latin Americans being very fervent people, and honestly, this is largely rooted in truth. Now, of course, I listed this as a reason I love Colombians, so yes, I do prefer this quality in the more positive contexts. Outside of general happiness though, an area where I find this really infectious is when they commit themselves to doing something that they're interested in. Like as a random example, let's just take this concept. A restaurant themed around video games. Now, if you compare how Colombians would approach this idea compared to how Australians would approach it, you'd find 2 very different results. In Australia, we have a restaurant in Melbourne called 8-Bit. It's obviously video game themed with a small menu of fast food named after various properties, along with some Mario decals on the wall. Other than that, it's reasonably low-key. The decor is modern and minimalist, as is the colour scheme, and whilst it is video game themed, it's subtle enough for the restaurant to appeal to just about anyone. Now, we do have some themed restaurants that are a bit more packed out with gaming decorations and paraphernalia, but these are typically arcade restaurant hybrids where the focus isn't as solely on the dining. Anyway, now let's compare that to a video game themed restaurant in Colombia, Chronos Fantasy. As you can see, they absolutely went to town on this. There's hardly a square inch of the place that isn't covered in theming. Those chairs you're sitting on, fully covered with every gaming character in existence. Regular plain tables? I think not. Also, let's cover the walls with neon lights, life-size statues, arcade machines, hang some Mario blocks from the roof, put a giant friggin' LCD panel in the middle of the restaurant showing some trailers constantly, and I haven't even mentioned the main draw of having a TV with a Switch loaded at every single table, where you get the option of playing both Mario Kart and the entire Retro Switch online catalogue with both a Joy-Con or an SNES controller. Oh yeah, and the actual menu, just under 60 food items plus around 40 types of drinks. The passion here is something else. I mean, yeah, it's arguable that the absolute sensory overload kitchen sink approach isn't the most tasteful, but it's hard to not be endeared by it when you consider the amount of love that went into the place. And that's really the point I'm trying to drive home here, because this is just one example of a passion project, but it's like this across so many things in Colombia. The music, the telenovelas, the festivals, the dancing, it's all got 110% unadulterated enthusiasm behind it, where there's zero shame in letting loose to the nth degree. Now yeah, there are a lot of things in Colombia that could use a little more effort, like the customer service and a lot of the bureaucracy, but with that kind of thing, it's often more of a means to a financial end for people, so there's not really any passion there to begin with. When it comes to anything that really comes from the heart though, that's when you're going to see this extravagant celebration for what they're doing. Alright, now all that's pretty widely known, so for my second reason why I love Colombians, I wanted to pick something very specific and personal that you might not realise. So for number 2, they love animation. Again, this really is a personal thing, as in case you hadn't noticed from my intro, I am very much into animation. New Pixar or Disney animations in particular are often among my most anticipated films each year, and for those wondering, yes, I adored Encanto, and someday I want to do a deep dive frame-by-frame cultural analysis on it for this channel. With all of that being said, I often feel like I have to hide my passion for animation when I'm talking about film with a lot of people in Australia. There's sort of this prevailing idea that animation is just for kids here, at least among general audiences. Like if I were to tell someone that Pixar's Elemental is my most anticipated movie of the year, they might be a bit weirded out. And I think this is the case in a lot of Western countries around the world. Animation's sort of considered this subpar medium, and a property isn't legit unless it's in live action, which is likely why Disney feels the need to turn all their animations into live action remakes. It's like, oh yeah, we have this potty little animation called Pinocchio, but no one wants to sit through that, so here's a live action remake. Yeah, now it's a real movie. And the sad part is, as much as animation enthusiasts like myself are frustrated with this approach, the general public still show up in droves to these films because of this idea that live action is a more palatable medium than animation. To wrap this back around to Colombians though, I was in for a pleasant surprise when I found that there not only isn't a stigma against animation there, but that people of all ages widely embrace and celebrate it for the exciting medium it is. Personally, I think this might have something to do with the fact that animations are often caricatures of real life. Like, the whole reason filmmakers choose this medium to begin with is for what it can offer that live action can't, and one of those things is its flexibility in allowing to show just the essence of something. When you have the freedom of drawing or molding a character from scratch and assigning a certain type of voice to it, it allows you to do things that you mightn't be able to do when working with actors in a live action setting. The result is that many of these stories have a lot of creative liberation. Again, if you look at Elemental, it's about a fire that falls in love with water, something that you really couldn't do in live action. And I think it's just this unfiltered display of imagination that drives with a lot of Colombians, since, as I described previously, they're also very liberated people when it comes to displaying their innermost passions and ideas. Where live action films might feel ashamed of being too zany or fantastical, animations often embrace this, and I think this letting loose of ideas and passion without limits is a philosophy that resonates with a lot of Colombians. This isn't just me hypothesizing though, I really have seen a lot of love for animation around Colombia. For one, I noticed with the graffiti, cartoon characters seem to pop up quite a bit, and I know this isn't uncommon for graffiti artists generally, but I would say I notice a substantial amount more of cartoon graffiti than I've seen anywhere else. I've also found in South America generally, there does seem to be a significant market for this kind of thing. I remember when I went to Brazil, they had a Woody Woodpecker movie in cinemas, which at the time couldn't be seen anywhere else in the world. In fact, this t-shirt I'm wearing right now, I bought in Brazil. It's actually the official merch of a Brazilian rock band who chose Woody Woodpecker for one of their designs. In Colombia specifically though, I've also spoken with a lot of people who say that they have very fond memories watching cartoons like Looney Tunes during their childhood, and I notice when I go to the cinemas to see an animated movie, it's not just kids and families, there are often just as many people like me who aren't parents but still go to see these movies. I even have several Colombian friends who do this, and they're not in some niche subculture of animation nerds like me. They're just regular people who really enjoy these movies. Anyway, I'm sure you can tell this is something I could talk about forever, so I'll stop myself here and move on to the next reason I love Colombians, and that is that they're extremely hospitable people. What I mean by this is that they're often very naturally inclined to help each other, in many cases going above and beyond their line of duty or obligation. Now, as I said earlier, there are certain industries and job positions where this isn't the case, and it can in fact be the polar opposite. Again, anything bureaucratic springs to mind, but when it comes to things that are more personal, be it inside or outside of the workforce, Colombians can be very generous with their time and care towards helping people. I could list numerous examples of this from my own experience, but a few that come to mind, I once had a taxi driver do my laundry at his apartment after he couldn't find an open laundry anywhere in the city for me. I've had a woman and her daughter offer me a lift from Manizales Airport to the city and then buying me Domino's pizza for dinner. I had a procedure that went for multiple days for an injury when I was in Bogota, and then had several checkups for it, and my doctor refused to charge me any more than the initial fee of around $50, and even went out of his way to check up on me in my own apartment once. I could go on, there really are so many instances of people going the extra mile. It's very much a part of the culture. I should say too that all of the examples I just gave were not things I asked for, but were offered to me voluntarily. I'm not a very demanding person, and generally I try and get things done myself whenever I can, but one thing I've learned about Colombia is that there's no shame in asking people for help whenever you need it. It's not like my own country or maybe yours where you might avoid asking for help because you feel like you'd be being a bother. In Colombia, people just don't think that way. In fact, they often don't think about it at all. It's almost like a given. Now, obviously you shouldn't exploit this, you should still be respectful and grateful for it, but my point is that you don't have to feel like a nuisance for it either. So yeah, Colombians, very generous, hospitable people. Moving on to number 4 though, they're resilient people. Now, this is something that I'd say has developed over time because, as you may or may not know, Colombia's been through a lot of civil unrest throughout history. There's been umpteen civil wars stretching across the latter half of the 19th century, along with a couple in the 20th century, and in more modern times, they've had a lot of conflict between paramilitary groups and guerrilla groups, along with the drug trade. A lot of this unrest has created a history of mass displacements where people have had to flee their homes and move to safer areas, which has particularly been the case in regional towns and countryside villages. Now, thankfully, Colombia is currently a lot safer than possibly any other moment throughout history since there haven't been any civil wars for a while, and a lot of the armed groups have largely disbanded. And whilst there still is a drug trade, it's not at the level it was in the 80s or 90s where they had constant large-scale terrorist attacks used as blackmail against the government. Still, although younger generations haven't had to contend with this level of life-threatening civil unrest, you can still see how this history has affected the attitude and outlook on life in Colombian culture. You might think this would be cause for a nihilistic or jaded perception of the world, but in reality it's done quite the opposite. Although they've lived through many horrors throughout history, there's always been a light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, sure, it's not like anything ever gets immediately fully resolved, but the relative peace that follows these dark periods is something that's given Colombians a sense of hope and tenacity to push on, knowing from history that nothing is forever. Now, I gotta be careful in making assumptions, but I do feel like this history has caused a resilience not just in the broader societal sense, but on the individual level as well. One thing I noticed with many of my Colombian friends is their ability to bounce back from any kind of personal hardship. It's not that they're desensitized to it when it's happening, but that they're able to move on from it relatively quickly. Again, I don't know for certain if this is something that's been instilled in people after living through a history of unrest, or if there's another cultural factor at play, but either way, this stoic resilience is really a quality I admire. Now, getting to my last pick of things I love about Colombians, I've put the family dynamic. So this is probably another one you've heard a lot about already, but it really is true. Simply put, family is an extremely important part of the culture in Colombia. Although the rate of single parenthood is quite high in Colombia, this isn't usually due to divorce. In fact, the divorce rate is only at around 9% in Colombia, which is much lower than countries like the US, where it can range from 40 to 50% for first-time marriages. Even if one parent is absent in a child's life though, there'll usually still be other members of the family who hold great significance. It can be common for extended family, like grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins to be very present, for instance. I also find that they're very welcoming of family, friends, or anyone of relational significance. It kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about their hospitality. The whole mi casa es tu casa thing really is something that comes as second nature to Colombians. One of the things I personally think is quite sweet though when it comes to family is the level of respect for one another. I think it's definitely the case that in first world Western countries like my own, respect for your parents isn't really a given. It's more something that's dependent on the sort of values you've been brought up with. In the worst case scenarios, I've seen kids treating their parents like absolute trash, even teenagers and young adults sometimes. Not that I need to tell you this. I mean, I'm sure you've all seen a real life Eric Cartman before. In Colombia though, this blatant disrespect for parents is much more strongly frowned upon, as respect for family members is an important cultural value that's instilled from a young age. You'll often hear Colombians calling their parents and even siblings señor and señora, meaning sir and ma'am. The thing I like most about all of this though is that it doesn't seem to detract from the relationships. You might think that these formalities create distance between family members by stifling casual communication, but that really doesn't seem to be the case. I've noticed with several of my Colombian friends actually just how important it is to communicate with at least one of their parents on a regular basis if they're living out of home. Like, I remember when I first moved out of Colombia, I'd be talking with my parents maybe once a week, but I've got several Colombian friends who do this every day. So I think it's really the best of both worlds. You have this respect in the family that's an important cultural value, but then you also have this open communication. In countries like my own, I wouldn't say it's widely common to have both of these things. It can often be one or the other. Anyway, those were my 5 picks for things I personally love about Colombian people. Let me know though in the comments if there's anything in particular that you really like about Colombians. As always, thanks for watching this far, and if you enjoyed this, like, sub, bell, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao!